Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We are continuing our series of 2025 SEC team previews. Today we're going to talk Mississippi State as we move into kind of the midway point of our alphabetical journey through our SEC team preview podcasts. Mississippi State coming off a bounce back year in a lot of ways. Got back to a regional last year after a couple of difficult seasons. By many metrics, looked host worthy. The RPI wasn't quite there. We don't need to relitigate that. You can go back to any number of podcasts that you and I did last spring if you really want to take yourself back there again. But they end up going to a tough regional. They're eliminated there. But I don't think there's any way to look at it except that it was a success in moving back in the right direction. And then I'll toss it to you with this, Mark. I think for me, the thing about last season that if I'm a Mississippi State fan that I'm most heartened by is that it wasn't last season's success wasn't just that they brought in, portal guys and just microwaved it. They did have some, they did have some guys that kind of fit that bill, but I think theirs was more of a story of even the portal guys they had. Cal Steven was way better last year than he was at Purdue, but they also got Jerangelo Sane just took a huge step offensively. David Mershon took a huge step forward. Dakota Jordan, fully fulfilled his promise of being the guy they thought he was going to be. Connor Heisick was far better than he was even at his time at VCU. So if I'm a Mississippi State fan, I'm looking at, hey, you know what? Like, last year, Justin Parker was in his first year as pitching coach. Clearly that seemed to work. So maybe we've got something like that in the offing again. And okay, there's a lot of questions in the lineup, but last year, if I'd have thought, I'd have thought Mississippi State would be in trouble if you told me that, like Connor Heisick and David Mershon were going to be driving the bus for that team for a lot of last year. And it turns out, no, they were just that good. And so that's to me what would give me optimism if I was a Mississippi State fan, is that it's not just a certain set of players that came in and quote unquote fixed it. It was that there was a lot of development happening underneath the surface.
Yeah. You mentioned Justin Parker, and that's where I want to go with this. I mean, they were so much better on the mound. I mean, they went from one of the worst pitching staffs in the conference to, I mean, at the end of the year, they were certainly one of the best. You can make a case, they had the best 1-2 punch in the conference with the way Steven and Sanger were pitching at the end of the year. I think now there's a proof of concept that with talented pitchers like those, that Parker's going to be able to get the most out of them, or at least more than they have been getting out of them. And that's exciting, because if you can pitch in this league at the top of at the top of this conference, you're in the top of the country, you're going to win a lot of games and you're going to play in the postseason. And if your offense comes around and there's a lot of talent on, just like last year had plenty of talent, this year there's a lot of talent as well. They're going to be good. I don't think there's any doubt that Mississippi State should be at least similar to where they were a year ago. Now, depending on how some guys perform and elevate, and injured guys are coming back, and there's all this kind of gray area that we don't really know what's going to happen. But if all that goes according to form, and everything doesn't have to go your way, but if you get enough of them to go your way, I mean, this is a team that's going to be right there in that hosting discussion, which is where Mississippi State wants to be at the end of the year. I think they're going to be one of the, certainly a top half. You talk about 16 teams in the SEC. They're going to be in the top 8. Top 8's going to be right where you want to be. It's probably the top 15 in the country, something like that. That's where Mississippi State baseball expects to be, right? You don't have to be number 1 every year. No one is, but you want to be in that discussion where you're at least showing up on the Nerdcast as one of the hosts for several weeks, so you can kind of get excited about that as the season gets closer to the end, right? And I think that's where this team is going to be, which is, it sets up for a really exciting year.
Yeah, I think it was something kind of poetic about the way last season progressed, in that by the end of the season, they were probably one of the best 16 teams, but it's not
Yeah.
just the best 16 teams. It's the best 16. It's the as I heard someone on one of the college football like playoff reveal shows one week say, it is the best of the deserving,
Mm-hmm.
and which is, it's a mix of deserving and best and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, point is that by the end of it, they were right there where they should have been. And had they played like that all season, they would have hosted. But the reality is, like, I don't want to put it all just on this, but like 2 losses to Austin P on a Tuesday and a Wednesday,
Yeah.
like had a pretty large bearing on not hosting, or a loss to Air Force in that series, just so like those individual games end up mattering quite a bit. So the poetic piece is just that team early in the season still wasn't it. I mean, I think you and I, if we're honest with ourselves, probably both thought, here we go again.
Yeah.
Like, this is the same old thing. And it wasn't. And the team grew up, team got better, and then figured it out. But so I do think there was, as frustrating as it was for Mississippi State fans to not end up hosting, I do think there's like a lesson in there of like, hey, you know what? You want to host, like, you got to take care of those games. And last year in March and February, they weren't ready to do so. And now I think they're just in a lot better place to do so.
Mm-hmm. And I think a big part of that is the success the pitching staff had a year ago. And now a lot of those guys are gone. I mean, we mentioned Steven and Sanja, but Nate Dome is gone. Tyler Davis had a great year. Brooks Auger, Tyson Harden, Cam Schulke. I mean, those are a lot of guys who pitched, some important innings. So in some ways you're rebuilding it, but you're doing it with people who have pitched for the most part, and you're just asking them to fill different roles. And that's where we are in the sport. I mean, it's such a transitory sport where you're in a different place every year, it seems like. And people leave either for the draft or to the portal, or they're injured or whatever. So there's always going to be opportunities. And the group of players that Mississippi State has on the mound, I'm really excited about, because there's some elite talent to pick from to see who emerges into those key roles. Because I look down this pitching staff, and honestly, I mean, Pico Cone, Carson Ligon, Stone Simmons, Jacob Pruitt are guys that maybe are a little bit ahead right now, but you keep going down this list. I mean, Luke Dotson, Dane Burns, Evan Sierra, Bradley Lofton, Gavin Black, Charlie Foster, all these. I wouldn't be surprised if any of those ended up into the pitching key roles, whether it's that stud reliever, or whether it's end up in the rotation or being your primary midweek guy. There's just so many options to pick from, and I don't know that a lot of programs really know, okay, this is going to be our trio, our 1, 2, 3, or at least they know who they're going to be. Maybe not the sequence. Mississippi State, for me, it's you may have a couple guys you feel more confident than others, but there's just so many candidates to pick from, and that's what's going to make these first few weeks. You mentioned the loss to Austin P. I think this pitching staff might be a little deeper, and it's going to be fascinating to see internally on the mound how they fight it out to see who performs the best, so that by SEC time they know who's in what role. Because that, I mean, when you've got 12, 13 guys that you feel good about, it's a really nice problem to have, but there's a lot to figure out, because there's just so many pieces of that puzzle that you've got to fit together.
You listing off the pitchers, with the exception of like the freshman like Charlie Foster, it's just like a who's who of guys I can't believe are still in college, and I mean that in a good way,
Yeah,
because that's kind of what you want, right?
right.
But Stone Simmons, my goodness, like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's and the unfortunate part is a lot of that's injuries, right? And like,
Yeah.
I know sometimes we kind of roll our eyes at coaches who tell us over and over again about how injured they were, but I don't think I fully, like, until I started looking at some of the guys they have back this year, like, I don't think I fully internalized how injured they've been the last couple of years. So I think there really is something to that, I think, with this program in particular. On the lineup side of things, some of my questions start kind of with like, what kind of Dylan Cup performance do we get? Got off to a slow start last year at the plate, and then got injured and then was lost for the year. But we kind of always knew he was like the defense was going to come first and the bat was going to have to come later. But now that he's missed basically a whole season, how, is he further behind offensively now because he lost some development time? He's not a small guy. So when you say defense first shortstop, I think we imagine like a guy shaped like Ozzie Smith. Like he is not that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some physicality there. So like, is he a more advanced hitter this year than what we kind of expect? I think that's important. I think, is Noah Sullivan ready to be like a real dude? The reports that you and I got coming out of the fall is that like, yeah, he really looks the part, but he played in the Big South last year. No disrespect to the Big South. It's not the SEC, right? So is he ready to make that jump? Ace Reese is healthy after an injury-plagued season in Houston, like another guy that ton of buzz this fall. But is he ready to be like a real dude? And those are, a handful of questions, but for me, it's kind of the transfers. Are they ready to really take on the SEC? And then what version of Dylan Cupp do we get? Because as much as you and I this time last year were kind of maybe preaching a little bit of patience with Dylan Cupp, because it's like, hey, not only is he a freshman, but he's kind of a glove first guy. The reality is he was a blue of the blue chip recruit. And so on some level, he was expected to be a cornerstone guy. And so is he ready to be that coming off of a missed year?
Yeah, that is a huge question as we head into it. I think another question positionally is center field. Is it Michael O'Brien, who really didn't have much of a role last year? He's able to come in, had a great fall, but what happens when the jerseys change color? I think the other thing is, if it's not him, do you move Bryce Chance over? Can he handle center? There was even some Ross Highfield, who's their catcher, even worked out in center field. He's a freak athlete, that kind of thing. You don't see a whole lot of catcher center field combos, but he's apparently up to the task. I think those are important pieces or questions to fill out. Nolan Stevens, huge upside both on the mound. We didn't mention him talking about pitchers. He could factor in as a key arm, but he's also a legit hitter and great outfielder. What do you do with him? And then there's the two-way part of that, and how do you manage his workload? I think the other part is Hunter Hines is back, and most of us did not expect him to be still on campus. The draft didn't go the way he wanted, and he's back to hit in the heart of that order and be a slugger. And you got to expect he's going to hit 20 plus home runs again, and having that in the middle of the lineup just makes everybody else better. I've heard the same thing you have about Ace Reese, just a potential breakout star. It was one of the best players in the fall. If that continues, he's going to hit second or third in the lineup and be one of the key cogs as Mississippi State moves forward. I think the other thing to try to figure out is a guy like Sawyer Reeves, who's coming over from the Citadel. He's listed as the leading second baseman right now. How does that translate? We talked about the same thing with Sullivan. You're moving up, playing more challenging pitchers, competition. What does that look like? But then I do think that there's some depth. I think there are enough players. The Ethan Pulliam, the Aaron Downs, Garrick Fry from North Alabama, Joe Powell, who's back as a catcher. They're not just going to have to depend on 9 guys. I think this is a team that's going to be able to go deep and have 14, 15 guys. And if, Lord forbid somebody gets hurt, it's not going to be the end of the world, because they've got more flexibility than maybe some of their prior versions have had. So I like the team. I think it's got a chance to be really good, but they do have a ton of questions based on all of that lost production. I mean, their best players are gone other than Hines. So it's going to be one of those clubs that is probably gonna look a lot better in April and May than they do in February and March, just as they got all these pieces and not quite sure, who's going to play where and how it all shakes out.
Yeah, and therein lies some of the risk, right? That that they're going to likely be better in April or May than they are in February and March on a couple levels. One is that, like we talked about, you can take on water early, and it's sometimes it's hard to make up for that. But then secondarily is, we've mentioned this before in this offseason, but for the listeners who are just now kind of like, snapping to attention on college baseball, just because the team was good last year and got back to the postseason does not fully alleviate the pressure that this program is going to feel. The coaching staff in particular is going to feel, because that's the give and the take of Mississippi State. Is the give is obvious, that you play your games in a palace of a ballpark. You have everything you need there to win. You have history. You have a passionate fan base that even when they weren't good those couple of years, were still packing it into the ballpark because it's just that good of an experience. But the take is that it also comes with a lot of built-in pressure. And if you're coming into the season kind of, still working on some things, second weekend, Missouri State's pretty talented. That, you could lose a game there. Like that wouldn't shock me. And then you follow that up, you've got games against Arizona and Oklahoma State and Houston following that. And by the way, a midweek. Well, look, Mark, look, if this was 2008, oh buddy, if this was 2008, Rice, Arizona, and Oklahoma State, boy, that would have been a gauntlet, But now, sadly, it makes this Houstonian's heart sad.
Yeah.
To know that Rice is going to be the game, that if Mississippi State wants to, they probably can pitch off that game. They could probably make that a bullpen day. Yes, but you're right. But so they've got enough challenges early where it's not just that, and those would be, especially those games in Houston, those would be quality losses to Arizona or Oklahoma State if that happens. But it would be more about, how much of that kind of like old scar tissue starts to come back of like worrying about, are we good enough? What's gonna, is this going to be more like last year, or more like the 2 years prior? And I don't know when that would go away. Is it if they host this year? Is it if they get back to Omaha? I don't know. And I don't think if we ask 100 Mississippi State fans if they would be able to tell you either. It's just kind of one of those, we'll know it when we feel it kind of deals. So the talent is there to alleviate that pressure. This could be an Omaha team, but also it could be a team, if they get off to a little bit of a slow start, we're kind of looking back at it, and there's a pressure-filled second half of the season.
Yeah. And to your point, I think should they get off to a slow start, all they have to do is point to last year and how they overcame that. Because a lot of these guys, even though they weren't in the same roles, they were on the team, or at least with the program. So I do think that, just me spitballing here, I think Mississippi State has turned the corner and they're going to continue to ascend. But until you get more than 1 year of it, there's always going to be that question, because those other 2 years were just so painful. Coming off, winning the national title and then not being even in the discussion anymore. That's a gut punch. It's really hard to get over that. And then last year to kind of start shaky and then figure it out, it was such a uplifting, cathartic kind of experience that, and I guess that's kind of where you're going with this, is you really need to build on that, because you're not completely done with that fog that was still present over the program for a couple of years. So, but if I'm picking, I'm thinking they're going to be another quality club this year, be right in the mix to host a regional, and if things go their way, they could have, there could be baseball in Starkville, and no one would enjoy that more than the folks there in the left field lounge.
No doubt. Real quick, you know this better than anybody, because A, you've written about it, and then B, you're focused. You do a better job focusing on it than really anybody at D1. Like, the schedule breaks pretty well for them, frankly. Yeah. If there is a team that you think, just think, listener, to yourself, who are some teams that I think could finish 14, 15, 16 in the SEC? They play all of those teams. So like that, the only series that I see here on their schedule that I go, I probably wouldn't pick them to win that one is when they go to LSU, and Mississippi State's done a pretty good job with LSU the last couple of years. So, I think Mississippi State has a really good shot in that series, but that's the only series on paper where you're like, okay, that's probably
Definitely
one where
an underdog, right?
where you're definitely not going to get picked to win that series. But everything else,
Yeah, I mean, we
like
can
you
go
could
through it
reasonably
real quick. Yeah, I mean, the home schedule is definitely harder than the road schedule, which is what you want,
right?
because you think you got a better chance to pull some upsets at home. We got Texas, South Carolina, Florida, Kentucky, and Ole Miss. Certainly, Florida would be, maybe that when you're an underdog. In Texas, you're probably even. But playing at home, I'd probably pick Mississippi State. The other three, you're definitely favored. And then on the road, Oklahoma, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, Missouri. Certainly, as you mentioned, LSU. The others, you're either favored or toss-ups.
Or a coin flip at worst.
Yeah, right. And then you miss Arkansas, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. Wow. You just missed
half of the top 16 teams.
10. Yeah. So to your point, it breaks pretty well. And if I'm Mississippi State, I feel like that's going to help my conference record, which, and as the conferences continue to get larger and larger, I don't know that conference record will carry the same mystique that it has in the past. That remains to be seen, to see how the committee kind of rolls with that. As conferences have gotten bigger, if you're going to hear us talking about it all year, how conference records should mean less than they used to because the schedules are so unbalanced. We're going to be doing something called a conference strength of schedule. You've seen the non-conference strength of schedule, and this will kind of correspond to it, because really within your conference, it's going to matter who you play and who you miss. And you can. People will probably say, oh, well, Mississippi State misses all these teams. That's a good thing, guys. You're going to have a chance to collect wins, have a gaudy record, if you're a good enough team, and be able to meet your goals. Because then you're just wanting to get in and host, right? Because everything else is totally up to you, because then you're on even footing. And I think Mississippi State will be in a great shape if they play to their ability.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think there's a lot of things working their way, and I played devil's advocate a couple times there during our chat, but I too think this is a team that's probably a lot closer to last year than the 2 years prior as well. I do think there's just too much positive momentum there for a step back. Although, look, you're 1 or 2 injuries away. Things happen, but I think on paper they're in a really good spot to have a nice year this year, and certainly that will be welcome in Starkville. That's an episode. That's going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I will repeat an appeal that I made on recent episodes, because this is the Mississippi State episode. This is going to be among the most listened to, so I will make sure to do this appeal in this episode. But one is, if you haven't done so, leave us a review on Apple Podcast if you would, or give us a thumbs up on Spotify or whatever it is they do, what they do there. And furthermore, if you leave us a 5-star review, and then in the comment on Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a question, about your team, about the SEC in general. Mark and I will answer it on an upcoming podcast. We'd love to have some of that interaction as well. So feel free to do that with your review. We'd love to chat with you that way. So there's that. Also, if you've not subscribed to SEC Extra, this is a really good time to do so for a couple of reasons. One is that the season is, as I look at my watch, about 2.5 weeks away. More like 3 weeks, but we're getting pretty doggone close. Yeah. So that's a beautiful thing. So that's good timing there. Also, the ACC Extra package has launched. If you buy the SEC Extra, you get the ACC Extra. So if you're someone, and I know a lot of Mississippi State fans fall into this category, if you're someone who, yes, you love your team, but you also just love college baseball, that's a pretty good deal. So you get both with the purchase of either SEC Extra or ACC Extra. You can still use the code FALL20 to get 20% off of whatever annual subscription you select there. Mark and I would be humbled and honored if you would give us a try if you've not done so far. And thank you to all who have been along with us this entire ride. Mark and I going into our 3rd season of doing this, believe it or not. We're basically an old married couple at this point. So, so
No comment.
For better or worse, you learn people's quirks. You learn how they operate.
And believe me, the two of us, we got some quirks.
That's true. We do have some quirks. A quirky couple of folks. All right. So that's going to do it. Thank you, Mark, as always, for joining me. Thank you, the listener, for listening.